And welcome to Straight Up with Mark Petroni. I'm your host. Well, don't blame us for your problems, Canada. So says U.S. Vice President JD Vance in a shot across the bow to Liberal voters, wide open immigration, and the CBC. In a post on X, Vance writes, and with all due respect to my Canadian friends whose politics focus obsessively on the United States, your stagnating living standards have nothing to do with Donald Trump or whatever boogeyman the CBC tells you to blame. The fault lies with your leadership elected by you. Vance was responding to economic data suggesting living standards in Canada have declined because of leftist policies. Vance went on to write, while I'm sure the causes are complicated, no nation has leaned more into diversity is our strength. We don't need a melting pot. We have a salad bowl immigration insanity than Canada. It has the highest born share of the population in the entire G7, and its living standards have stagnated. The U.S. economy has continued to outperform Canada over the last decade, leading to a widening living standard gap between the two countries. Well, BC Premier David Eby says Alberta, Saskatchewan, and the Carney government are holding pipeline talks behind his back. He's already voiced his opposition to a pipeline and a proposed lifting of a ban on tanker traffic off the northern coast of BC. Let's listen.
We have 4 times more major projects on the board than any other province in Canada, and the vast majority of those projects rely on the support of the coastal First Nations, for whom the oil tanker ban is the sole reason why they're able to tolerate those other projects. So this is a broadside attack on an oil tanker ban that is the foundation of economic growth mapped out for the entire country for the foreseeable future.
For his part, Conservative House Leader Andrew Scheer says Canada's ban on tankers makes no real sense, considering the Americans have been going there for years.
While the Liberals have made it illegal for Canadian companies to load Canadian ships with Canadian oil, U.S. tankers can continue to travel off BC's coast and take their oil to countries around the world. As we speak, the U.S. crude oil tanker California is traveling from Tacoma to Alaska along that west coast. Why are the Liberals keeping in a law that prevents Canada from exporting our oil while U.S. tankers travel through the exact same place?
Well, despite the setbacks and opposition to a pipeline from BC and Ottawa, Alberta Premier Danielle Smith says she remains hopeful.
What else would it take then for you to get to that MOU with Ottawa, and how close are you at this point?
Well, you know, we're working on it. Still very hopeful. I was hopeful before the Grey Cup, which was one of the deadlines he'd set for new major projects. We know that we've got a little bit more work to do on the technical side to be able to submit our pipeline proposal for consideration to the Major Projects Office. We've targeted the spring on that. And if we do get to an agreement with the federal government, we'll certainly let you know. And but I remain very hopeful as our negotiations continue.
Now, British Columbia has offered to support increasing oil capacity on the existing Trans Mountain pipeline, but Danielle Smith says that's just not good enough. I'm now joined by former public affairs officer for the Air Force and journalist David Creighton. Welcome once again, David. Appreciate it.
Oh, my God, Mark, it's so nice to be back. You know, you have been there every week on so many good issues, and I think we have a lot in common.
Well, we're going to get to the F-35s in a minute, but I've got to ask you about this JD Vance clip, because Vance was responding to economic data, which shows that Canada, in terms of our standard of living, has been on the decline now for at least 10 years. And the fact that we have made the decisions around who our leaders are going to be, that is directly in his, crosshairs. That's what he's going after. He says, you're the ones who pick these leaders, and the leaders are the problem that you have as far as your current state goes. So don't blame America. What do you think?
I think JD Vance is 100% correct. And it was Mark Carney who wanted to blame the United States for our problems, and to some extent even Pierre Poilievre. Our problems are a direct result of the fact we've had 10 years plus now, as of October, of a socialist government masquerading as a liberal government. And this started with Justin Trudeau 10 years ago. In October, It's continued with his successor, Mark Carney, who's even worse. And people tell me, Mark Carney sounds reasonable. I think Mark Carney's one of us. I hear this from conservatives saying, no, I'm sorry. He's smarter than Justin Trudeau. A lot smarter than Justin Trudeau, which is not hard to be. But he's not working for Canada. His end game has nothing to do with Canadian sovereignty against the US. His end game has nothing to do with a stronger economy. His end game is the absolute destruction of the Canadian economy and the subservience of the United States to China. Because for a decade now, Mark Carney has argued that the Chinese yuan should replace the US dollar as the global currency, and that China should replace the United States as the economic engine of change in the global market. So Mark Carney is certainly achieving his ends, but what people don't understand is that those ends have nothing to do with why Mark Carney was elected as prime minister. People really believed him. I know that. These 65 years and older people who voted for Mark Carney in large numbers, they thought he was going to be a return to normalcy. That's the last thing Mark Carney wants, is a return to normalcy. This is a takeover of your economy by Brookfield and other agents who Mark Carney controls. Better shut up there.
It's interesting who he targets, though. And I think what this says is that Vance and others in the United States are getting tired of Canada using Donald Trump as an excuse, as a scapegoat for whatever ails Canada. And I mean, if you read his post here, he says, your stagnating standards have nothing to do with Donald Trump or whatever boogeyman the CBC tells you to blame. The fault lies with your leadership elected by you. And so he's basically pointing a finger at the electorate, saying you're responsible because of who you voted for. And so this is going to speak directly to Canadians. You made your choice and you are paying for it. That's what I read here. And the other side of it, as I said, is the America is probably growing a little weary with the fact that, everything that happens in Canada somehow is their fault.
Well, clearly, that's the message from the liberal media, not just in Canada, but the United States. They love to blame Canada for all the bad things that happen. Unfortunately, they're right about a lot. Canada exports a lot of its crazy ideology, its crazy woke policies. Donald Trump said no to so much of that. And as much as you don't like Donald Trump on tariffs right now, and I think just like he did on Epstein, he's gonna wake up one day and say, I don't think the tariffs are such a good idea the way I've applied them. He did a U-turn on Epstein because he realized he couldn't get away with it. Few presidents realize that they survive on the basic goodwill of their core supporters. Donald Trump knows that. And when he did a U-turn on Epstein, I said, there's a hint or more than a hint of greatness here. Because great presidents don't just make great decisions. They admit when they've made bad decisions. And Donald Trump admitted he made a bad decision about Epstein. And I think what is happening here is Donald Trump is sitting there in the White House right now. And what I've seen on his recommendations for Ukraine, for instance, he's realizing if he wants to sustain and enrich the Make America Great coalition, that he has to budge. He has to change. Few presidents, and they're all people with huge egos, and they're all people who are very narcissistic. And Trump is perhaps the worst among them for those characteristics. But Trump is realizing he cannot go it without the people. And I think this is a very, very important juncture in his presidency.
Well, Vance could be the next president. And here he is targeting Canada, saying, you're a country that has leaned more into this diversity as our strength, and we don't need a melting pot. We have a salad bowl immigration insanity. These are his words, not mine. Than Canada. Nobody has gone in that direction quite as much as we have. He points to the fact that we have the highest foreign-born share of the population in the entire G7, and its living standards, meaning our living standards, have stagnated. So here he is, seems to be drawing a parallel here, and a cause and effect, if I understand him correctly. He says, the reason why your living standards have stagnated is because of this immigration insanity, as he calls it. The fact that so many of the people who now inhabit Canada are foreign born in terms of the share of the population, more so than in countries where we think are a complete disaster, like the UK and France and Germany, which have had open borders. And yet he's saying we're the worst of the lot. And he says that's why you have a stagnating level of living standard in your country. What do you make of that?
Well, Mark, the last statistic I looked at in terms of foreign-born Canadians, 40% of people living in Canada were born outside of the country. And you're saying, can't be. It's true. That's how bad it got during the Trudeau years. We still are tabulating the absolute assault on Canada that Justin Trudeau did, and Mark Carney is continuing. And don't believe his garbage about I'm different than Justin Trudeau. I'm going to do it differently. No, he's not. He's doing the same thing immigration-wise, and he's doing the same thing spending-wise. But Justin Trudeau transformed this country. We literally went from 30 million to 40 million people in this country. Most of them immigration, illegal and legal. That's where Canada stands right now. 10 million new people during Justin Trudeau's reign. And we don't even know where the hell most of them came from. Are they Canadian? Do they want to adhere to democratic principles? Do they understand what Canada is all about? Do they understand what freedom and democracy are all about? It doesn't matter to Justin Trudeau because he thought they'd all vote Liberal. Yeah. Justin Trudeau took the Liberal policy of bring them in and they'll vote Liberal. This was the same policy that Joe Biden had during 4 horrendous years of tens of millions of illegal immigrants going into the United States because Joe Biden or whomever was making his decisions during those dark days of his mental problems. It doesn't matter. They're going to vote Democrat. So bring them in. It's no way to run an immigration policy. It's no way to run a country. And Canada was just as bad in terms of allowing illegals into the country and allowing mass immigration, legal mass immigration into the country, as the United States ever was. And we have no intention of dealing with it. And I'm not sure that our official opposition has any real desire to deal with that problem either.
Yeah, they know that a lot of Canadians have now decided that, immigration has gone way overboard. And when you look at crazy stats like the amount of money we've spent on quote unquote free healthcare for the newcomers, of course, we're talking about people who are not Canadians. We're talking about, people claiming refugee status, somewhere between, $500 and $900 million, depending on which numbers you want to believe, is the amount of money we are spending. And, and the level of healthcare that that we're offering the foreigners is better than that being offered citizens themselves. So that to me tells you a whole lot about where our government stands, what they think of us versus what they see as their future voting bloc. Once the boomers, I guess, get so old that they don't know which end is up anymore, they can't be relied on to vote Liberal forever. And so you've got to replace them with a new voting bloc of people. And the newcomers, well, that's the way to go. Just bring them in the numbers that, are astronomical, to your point earlier, and then give them free stuff. That's their strategy. That's their big strategy. And the beautiful part of it from their vantage point is that you, Canadian suckers, the taxpayers, get to pay for the fact that we're bringing in our next voting base. It's an absolute outrage. But I want to shift gears a little bit because you, of course, were in public affairs for the Air Force in Canada. And I know you have some strong views about the F-35s because now, of course, you have the elbows up crowd in the Liberal Party and elsewhere saying, yeah, let's stick it to Trump and go with the Gripper, the Saab Gripper, which is a Swedish fighter jet. And what obviously there's going to be complications because we are bound, I believe, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, we are bound to buy 16 of the F-35s from America. Now, rather than going for the full 88, the talk is let's have, a split fleet, and a divided fleet where you got, some planes from Sweden and some from America, the F-35s. What do you make of this mess?
Well, as I told you on your radio show yesterday, Mark, I don't know where to begin about how stupid, how absolutely catastrophic this decision could be. And I'm not convinced, by the way, that Mark Carney's actually going to do it. I think he's playing games with it. But if he does, why should we not buy Gripen jets from Saab in Sweden? Well, to begin with, they're not interoperable with our principal allies. And our principal ally with defense, yes, Mark Carney, is the United States. Not just through NATO, but more importantly through NORAD, the North American Aerospace Defense Agreement, which has basically defined our security arrangements, aerial security arrangements since 1958. And the ambassador to Canada has been saying repeatedly, U.S. Ambassador Canada has been saying repeatedly that I don't know if we can entertain you guys in the alliance anymore if you buy Swedish jets because they're not interoperable with the F-35, with the United States Air Force flies. And not just the USAF. We've got the U.S. Marines and the United States Navy are all flying the F-35s, have been now, my God, it's going to be almost a decade by the time we make a decision on this. This is crazy. Second point, Canada does not have a large enough Canadian Armed Forces to have a two-stream fighter program. And that means we're going to have pilots trained for the F-35, 16 of them, and the remainder trained for a Swedish jet. Can we find a Swedish instructor to do this? I don't know. Yeah. Pretty easy to find a NATO instructor or a U.S. instructor to do the F-35. Not so easy to train somebody on the Saab. And secondly, the ground crew. Somebody has to look after these aircraft when they land. And believe me, as a former public affairs officer in the Royal Canadian Air Force, I can tell you the ground crews, they are the unsung heroes. They look after these aircraft like they were their children at times. They make sure they're ready to fly again the next day. So that means we're going to have air crews and ground crews for two different fighter jets. Can't do it in a military our size. We haven't got the capacity to do that. If there's any other reasons, yes, this is catastrophic because as Colonel Douglas McGregor, a very, very good friend in terms of having him on my show many times, has said to me, if your prime minister really wants to piss off Donald Trump, have him buy the Swedish aircraft because the United States hasn't got much in terms of selling it on the international market. It's still the number one agricultural export. But it doesn't sell a lot of televisions anymore. Doesn't sell a lot of lazy boys anymore. Doesn't sell a lot of cell phones anymore. But it sells a heck of a lot of armaments. And if Canada turns its back on Donald Trump with this one, if it snubs its nose and says, we're going to buy the rest of them, I'm sorry, from Sweden, Donald Trump is going to be madder than hell. And if he hasn't met with Mark Carney for the last, 2 months now, he might never meet with Mark Carney again. And this could be the end of any possibility of having a trade agreement.
Yeah. It is interesting that, of course, the Swedes are now in NATO. They're a full-fledged member now, have been since, I guess, last year. And they're using these planes. And so therefore, they're not in sync with the rest of NATO. I mean, if the F-35s are the main aircraft used by NATO countries, then Sweden is out of step with that. But of course, if they can find a partner, or a NATO partner, to sell their planes to, well, then they can make the case, well, Canada's got our planes, we've got the Gripper as well, and so that way, that might be a way for them to try and finagle a way to not have to switch over to the F-35s, because isn't that one of the main stipulations for NATO membership? Is if you're going to sign up, you've got to get military hardware that is in sync, that is consistent with, copacetic with, the military hardware that other countries in NATO are using. I'm not 100% sure about that. But
No.
Go ahead.
That's entirely not true.
Okay.
NATO will accept anybody who's basically on life support right now, and that it's been that policy now ever since the Soviet Union died. Come on in to NATO. We don't care what you're flying, what you're doing, as long as we can occupy your land space. So no, it doesn't have anything to do with if we're operationally equivalent. And this is why, as I keep telling people, operational equivalency, interoperability is key to this, because we do train with the United States Air Force, and we do have a defense agreement with the United States Air Force called NORAD. And the other countries that fly the F-35, Great Britain, the Royal Air Force flies the F-35. The Royal Australian Air Force from Australia flies the F-35. Now, in my time as an Air Force officer, we were dealing with America 90% of the time in terms of operational activities, in terms of training, in terms of exchange of officers, exchange of pilots. We were dealing with Great Britain and Australia for the other 20% of the time. That's about 100%. We're not dealing with Sweden. Sweden is irrelevant. You have to remember, Mark, Sweden was a neutral country for most of the 20th century, all of the 20th century.
Yeah.
It suddenly decided to join NATO because it got a big military boost from it. And do you think Sweden really gives a damn about Canadian sovereignty? And we should be fighting for Sweden now? No, this is why NATO has gone off the rails, because there's so many members in this club now that it's a club that really has no meaning anymore. It used to be about stopping the Soviet Union from making 1 inch further across that border into Western Europe. What does it mean now? It means potentially getting us entangled in a third world war because some country you've never heard of accidentally struck Russia with a missile.
Yeah. I mean, it may not be a prerequisite for these countries to get the F-35s, but just a quick look at the NATO stipulations, which I'm sure you're aware of. Many NATO countries have the F-35s. 14 member nations either currently operate the jet or are committed to purchasing it. Countries like the US, the UK, Italy, Norway, Netherlands already fly that particular aircraft, while others like Belgium, Denmark, and Finland are in the process of acquiring it. And so now you have Sweden in there with its Gripper trying to sell its Gripper aircraft to Canada, which would put us, I mean, to your point, completely at odds with our NATO partners who are either flying the jet currently or committed to flying it. Last word to you, my friend.
Mark, we are in such an incredible problem here, and I have to get back to this. We had a chance to stop this government from not just passing a budget, from stopping a government. And I'm not just talking about last week's vote, or I guess we're still talking about this week's vote, and those comes because Friday, isn't it? The Conservative Party of Canada needs to focus on what's really important and stop playing the blame game and, you can't blame us that the government's falling. The Conservative Party of Canada, if it believes in free speech, and there's no other party in the House of Commons that proclaims a belief in free speech, at least from its primary members, unless they are prepared to bring this government down because its legislation is so bad, so odious, that it's worth fighting for, because this Carney government wants to take away your free speech. And there's 4 bills, 3 of them in front of Parliament right now, a 4th coming in the next week, according to what I just heard today. The Online Safety Act is coming. As Trudeau called it, the Online Harms Act is coming in the next 5 days. And this is on top of other surveillance and censorship bills. I'm sorry, it's not just about bail or jail and about safe communities and safe streets. It's about losing your fundamental freedoms in this country. That could come within the next 6 months, now that this Carney government has been allowed to survive. And that's why I'm very disappointed with the official opposition right now.
David Creighton, thank you so much for coming on the show. It's Creighton's Right is the name of the YouTube channel, correct?
Creighton's Right is the channel. The show is Stand on Guard. We're generally every day at 10 a.m. Sometimes we have to hold it up for the news, as I am doing today. But you can read me on Substack. You can read me on Human Events, The Post Millennial, and Blaze Media. Thanks for having me on today, Mark. I love it.
Thank you for coming on, David. Powerful stuff, as always. Appreciate it. And that is it for this edition of Straight Up. Appreciate you tuning in, my friends. We'll do it again soon, shall we? Bye-bye for now.